The fog rolls in thick, smothering the small Appalachian town in silence. The narrator works the niner at a long-listening train.
I grew up in a town that time forgot. One of those places wedged between the mountains where fog sits low on the ground, and you can smell coal dust in the air no matter how many years it's been since the mine shut down. We had one main road, 2 gas stations, and a diner that never closed, a relic from the days when freight trains still roared through town in the dead of night. Folks used to call it the heartbeat of the valley. Every night around 2, the whole town would tremble as the train passed, shaking windows and rattling dishes and cupboards. Then one year, it just stopped. The railway company shut down that line after a rock slide buried part of the track up north, and nobody ever fixed it. The town grew quieter after that, too quiet. Some said they could still hear the whistle some nights, faint and distant, like a memory that refused to die. When I was 19, I started working the night shift at that same old diner, the one right across from the station. It was a decent gig for someone trying to save money, and besides, I liked the quiet. The late hours brought a kind of stillness that felt almost sacred. Just me, the hum of the fridge, and the occasional trucker passing through looking for coffee strong enough to burn a hole through his chest. But every so often, a local would wander in after midnight. They'd talk about the old days, the trains, the noise, the jobs that used to exist. And if they'd had enough to drink, someone would always mention her, the woman by the railway. I thought it was just a ghost story, something to spook the new folks in town. Everyone said she was dressed in white, that she appeared in the fog holding a lantern that burned without fire. Some said she was a widow waiting for her husband to come home from a train that never did. Others swore she'd been hit by one herself. The details changed with whoever told it, but the tone never did. Every person who spoke of her got that same far-off look, like they were remembering something they'd rather forget. For months I laughed it off, until the night the fog rolled in thicker than I'd ever seen. It was late, maybe 2:30 in the morning. The diner was empty except for me and the sound of the clock ticking behind the counter. I remember pouring myself another cup of coffee and glancing out the window. The whole street had disappeared beneath a blanket of gray. Even the glow from the street lamps looked dim, swallowed by that mist. And that's when I saw her. At first I thought it was just a trick of the fog, a shape forming where my tired eyes wanted to find one. But the longer I stared, the clearer she became. A woman standing right beside the old tracks, her head bowed, her shoulders still. She wore something white, or maybe it was just pale from the moonlight, and her hair hung long, dark, and matted with moisture. I remember pressing my hand against the glass, leaning closer. She wasn't moving, just standing there like she was listening for something. The longer I looked, the more the silence pressed against me. No wind, no crickets, not even the hum of the streetlights, just the faint sound of my own breathing. Then she tilted her head, slowly, like she'd heard my thought. And I swear she was looking right at me. Something about that movement froze me in place. My mouth went dry. I wanted to call out, but the words caught somewhere deep in my chest. That's when I saw the lantern. It hung loosely from her hand, swaying just enough to catch the dim light. The glass inside glowed faintly, but there was no flame, just a cold shimmer that looked alive. And then she smiled. It wasn't warm. It wasn't human. It was small and slow, like the memory of an emotion she couldn't quite remember how to feel. The lights in the diner flickered just once, and when I looked back out the window, she was gone. The fog was still there, but the tracks were empty. I tried to shake it off, told myself I was tired, maybe even half dreaming. But I didn't sleep that morning when I got home. I just sat by my window and watched the fog thinning over the trees, wondering what I'd actually seen. The next night I asked old Henry, the cook, if he'd ever heard of her. He just went quiet for a long time. Then he said, "You shouldn't be looking out that window after 2. He told me the story the way his father had told him. Said there used to be a woman who worked at the depot back when the trains still ran. Her husband was a conductor on the late freight line. One night, his train derailed up the valley, something about a signal mix-up. They never found his body, just pieces of the wreck scattered along the gorge. She'd refused to believe he was gone. For months after, she'd walk the rails every night with his lantern, waiting to see the train lights through the fog. Then one winter, she disappeared too. Folks found the lantern half buried in snow by the bend where the line curved out of town. They said you could still see her sometimes, waiting. I told myself it was nonsense. But the thing about that kind of story is, once you've heard it, it stays with you. It lingers in the corners of your thoughts, waiting for the right kind of night to come back. A week later, that night came. The fog rolled in again, thicker this time, swallowing the street whole. The diner was dead quiet. Around 2 a.m, I started hearing something strange, a low hum, faint but steady. It wasn't the fridge and it wasn't the lights. It was outside. I stepped to the door, pushing it open just enough to listen. There was no mistaking it. It sounded like a train, but there hadn't been a train in 20 years. I stepped outside, the damp air clinging to my skin, the smell of wet earth rising around me. The fog curled low across the ground, swirling over the place where the tracks used to be. And then, through that wall of gray, came a light. Not bright, just a soft, steady glow, moving slow down the line that no longer existed. My legs carried me closer before I even realized it. The hum grew louder, vibrating through the air, through me. I stopped a few feet from where the tracks used to cut across the road. The light was coming toward me now, flickering like a heartbeat. And then she stepped out, the woman. Same as before, white dress, long hair, that faint, unearthly glow from the lantern she carried. Only this time she wasn't still. She was walking, slow and steady, like she was pacing herself with something unseen. Her feet made no sound on the pavement. I wanted to run, but my body wouldn't move. She stopped right where the rails used to be and lifted her head. I could see her face clearly now, pale, almost translucent, with tears dried like frost down her cheeks. She whispered something, but the sound didn't reach me. Her lips moved again, and this time I caught one word, wait. Then, faint and far, I heard it. The whistle, long, mournful, distant. I turned my head, expecting to see lights bearing down the road, but there was nothing, just fog. When I looked back, she was gone again. The hum faded. The air grew still. I didn't go back to the diner after that shift. Told Henry I was done with nights. He didn't argue, just nodded like he'd been waiting for me to say it. A few months later, the town tore up the last remains of the old tracks to pave the road through to the highway. I drove past the spot one morning and stopped just to look. The ground was smooth, black, freshly laid. No sign anything had ever been there. But when the wind blew just right, I could still hear it. The faint rattle of wheels on rails. The echo of something that shouldn't exist. And if you stand there long enough, in that same heavy fog, you might see a faint light drifting through the gray. Sometimes, when I close up the diner late at night, I swear I see her reflection in the glass, head tilted, listening, still waiting for that train that never came. When my grandfather passed away, I didn't expect to inherit much. He'd spent most of his life running that old general store on the edge of town, the kind of place where the floorboards creaked with every step, and the air always smelled faintly of dust and motor oil. The store had been around since the 40s, sitting at the crossroads between two forgotten highways. By the time it came to me, half the shelves were empty, and the paint was peeling from the sign out front. I didn't want it, not really, but I couldn't bring myself to sell it either. Grandpa loved that place, said it had been good to him even when the town wasn't, so I kept it running, more out of guilt than profit. I opened at 9, closed at 6, and spent most days restocking cans that would never sell. The regulars were few, old farmers, a mail carrier, and a couple of kids who came in for candy when they got off the school bus. The store was quiet most days. Too quiet. In the back office sat Grandpa's radio. It was one of those old wooden ones with big brass dials and fabric stretched over the speaker. He used to listen to it while doing the books, humming along to country songs that hadn't been played on the air in half a century. After he died, I tried turning it on once just to see if it worked. The tubes warmed up and static filled the room. That was all it did, just a soft, endless hiss. I left it there. But the first night the storm came through, everything changed. It was late October and I was counting the till, waiting for the thunder to pass before locking up. The lights flickered once, twice, then steadied. Rain hammered the roof, and the wind made the sign out front bang against the wall. That's when I heard it, a faint murmur coming from the back office. At first I thought maybe I'd left the computer on, but when I stepped inside I saw the radio glowing faintly, like someone had just switched it on. I hadn't touched it. The static was louder this time, rough and uneven, like someone breathing too close to a microphone. I was about to unplug it when the static cracked open, and a voice slipped through, my name. Whispered, low and drawn out. I froze. It was my grandfather's voice. Not a recording, not a memory. It was him. He said my name again, exactly the way he used to when I'd walk in late for supper. There was a tremble to it, familiar and human. I just stood there staring at that old box, my heart pounding so hard I could barely hear. Then the lights flickered again, and the voice kept talking, soft at first, then clearer. He started describing my day, word for word, what I'd eaten for breakfast. The phone call I'd ignored from my sister. Even the fact that I'd dropped a box of nails behind the counter around noon. Things no one could have known. I yanked the plug from the wall and ran out of that office like a child. Sat behind the counter for a long time, listening to the wind howl through the trees. When I finally worked up the nerve to go back in, the radio was quiet. No glow, no sound, just that heavy, uncomfortable stillness that settles in after something you can't explain. I tried to tell myself it was stress, that maybe I'd fallen asleep at the desk and dreamed the whole thing. But when I looked closer, I noticed something that made my stomach drop. The plug was still lying on the floor. The radio wasn't even connected. That night I didn't sleep. The next day, I came in early to open up. Everything looked normal, until I noticed that the radio was on again. It was faint, just a low hum under the noise of the fridge and the buzzing lights. I told myself it was faulty wiring, maybe a short somewhere. I didn't touch it this time. All day the sound seemed to follow me. Even when I turned up the music in the store, I could still hear it faintly beneath everything, that steady whisper of static. When the storm clouds started gathering again that evening, I thought about closing early. But the power bills were high, and the shelves were already thin. I stayed. Around 9, I was restocking the canned goods when I heard the first words again. Not through the radio, through the store. A soft, rhythmic whisper coming from somewhere between the aisles. It sounded like someone breathing. I froze mid-step and listened. The rain beat against the roof, but underneath it was the faint murmur of a voice. It wasn't words this time, just a low hum, like a song half remembered. My throat went dry. The back office door was open just a crack, and from where I stood, I could see that same dim orange glow pulsing from inside. I walked toward it slowly, my boots scuffing against the warped floorboards. The glow grew brighter with every step, flickering in time with the whispering sound. When I pushed the door open, the air felt colder, heavier. The radio was on again, but now it wasn't static. It was humming an old hymn. I knew that tune. My grandfather used to sing it when I was little, right before bedtime. The sound coming from that radio was soft, cracked with age, but unmistakably his. I stood there and listened until the last note faded. Then, clear as day, I heard him speak again. Don't turn it off. The words were gentle, almost pleading. I unplugged it anyway. That night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was in the house. Every creak, every sigh of the wind set my nerves on edge. Around 2 a.m, I heard a faint tapping, slow, deliberate, like fingers brushing against glass. I followed the sound into the kitchen, half expecting to see a branch hitting the window, but it wasn't coming from the window. It was coming from the old transistor radio on top of the fridge, the one I'd never used, the one that hadn't worked in years. It was on. The static filled the room, soft but constant, and beneath it was that same low hum. I unplugged it, pulled the batteries, and tossed it under the sink. The sound didn't stop. I left the house before dawn and drove straight to the store. The first thing I did when I got there was plug Grandpa's radio back in. The hum returned instantly, low and calm. The air seemed to ease somehow, like tension being released. Since then, I've kept it on. Every night. I clean the floors, stock the shelves, lock the doors, all with that soft static filling the silence. It's strange, but the nights are easier when it's running. Peaceful even. But sometimes when the wind's just right, the static breaks for a second, and I hear him again. Not angry, not sad, just there, watching. I've thought about getting rid of it, but I can't. The one time I tried, the night I stayed late to repaint the office, I unplugged it and left it off till morning. When I came back, Every can on the shelves was lying face down on the floor. The glass counter cracked clean through the middle. The security camera caught something, but the feed was corrupted. The screen flickers for a few seconds, then goes black. But right before it cuts out, there's a faint reflection in the office window. A figure leaning over the radio. I still don't know what to make of it. It's been 6 months since then, and the radio still plays. The static doesn't bother me anymore. I even started humming along sometimes to that same old hymn. But lately, I've noticed something different. The static isn't always random. Sometimes it pulses, rises, and falls, like breathing. Other times, it almost forms words. I try not to listen too closely. Last night, I closed up around midnight, the air thick with humidity. As I was turning off the lights, I heard a soft voice come through the radio. It wasn't Grandpa's this time. It was a woman's, quiet, whispering something I couldn't quite catch. Then I realized she was saying my name, over and over. The radio's still humming now, even as I write this. I think if I leave it on, it'll stay calm. I think it wants to be left alone, to keep talking to itself in the dark. But if I ever turn it off again, if that static ever stops completely, I'm afraid I'll hear those voices somewhere else. Maybe in the aisles, maybe behind me, maybe whispering my name from the dark. It was just supposed to be a quick detour. I was driving through the mountains, heading home after a long delivery route that had run me several hours late. My phone had no service, and the GPS cut out somewhere along a stretch of highway that wound so tight around the hills, it felt like the world had folded in on itself. By the time I saw the sign for a place called Miller's Inn, I was half asleep behind the wheel and running on fumes. The inn sat right off the road, a 2-story building with dark windows and a flickering neon sign that buzzed faintly in the mist. The word vacancy blinked red, half dead, but still glowing enough to feel like an invitation. There wasn't another light in sight for miles, so I pulled in. The gravel crunched under my tires as I parked. For a moment, I just sat there staring at the building. Something about it didn't feel right. Maybe it was the way the upper windows seemed darker than the night sky itself, or maybe it was the quiet. No crickets, no wind, just silence pressing in from all sides. But exhaustion beat out instinct. I needed sleep. Inside, the lobby smelled like old wood and mildew. There was a bell on the counter, tarnished from years of use. When I rang it, the sound barely echoed before a man appeared from a doorway behind the desk. He was thin, too thin, with gray hair slicked back and eyes that never met mine. His clothes looked clean but outdated, like something out of an old photograph. When I told him I just needed a room for the night, he nodded once and reached under the counter. "You can take room 3, he said, setting down a brass key on a cracked leather ledger. "But don't open the window." I thought he was joking. Maybe it was an old building thing, the kind of warning you give when the frame's loose or the locks don't work. But the way he said it made the back of my neck prickle. He didn't look up once, not even when I asked how much the room cost. He just said, "Cash only," and pointed toward the stairs. Room 3 was at the end of the hall on the 2nd floor. The carpet muffled my steps, and I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was listening from behind one of the closed doors I passed. The air smelled faintly of smoke and something sweet, like burned pine. The room itself was plain but clean. A small bed, a wooden dresser, and a single lamp on a nightstand. The wallpaper was faded yellow, curling near the corners. I noticed the window immediately. It faced the parking lot, framed by thin lace curtains. The latch was rusted, and a strip of tape ran across the sill, like someone had sealed it shut years ago. I unpacked the bare essentials, kicked off my boots, and collapsed onto the bed. The mattress groaned but held. For a while I just listened to the quiet hum of the building. I remember thinking it felt strange for a place so old to be so silent. No pipes creaking, no wind, nothing. Sometime around midnight, I woke up. At first, I didn't know what had stirred me. The room was pitch dark and the air had gone cold. Then I heard it, a soft, rhythmic tapping, tap, tap, tap. It came from the window. Half asleep, I figured it was rain. I reached for the lamp and turned it on. The light flickered weakly, barely cutting through the gloom. The sound came again, sharper this time. Tap, tap, tap. I pushed myself up and glanced toward the window. The curtains shifted slightly, though the air in the room was still. I was halfway to the latch before I remembered the clerk's words. "Don't open the window." I hesitated, hand hovering over the curtain. The tapping stopped. The silence that followed felt heavy, like the room itself was holding its breath. Then, faintly, from the other side of the glass, I heard it. A whisper. It said my name. Not shouted. Not breathed. Just whispered. Calm, certain, like whoever said it had been waiting a long time. Every muscle in my body locked. I stepped back slowly, my heart thudding in my chest. The lamp flickered again, and for a split second I thought I saw a movement behind the curtain. A shadow. Then the tapping started again, faster this time. Tap, 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 tap. The whisper followed, repeating my name in a low, desperate tone. It was so close I could almost feel it on my skin, against every bit of common sense. I reached out and pulled the curtain back. What I saw in that window wasn't possible. The glass reflected the room perfectly. Same lamp, same bed, same pale yellow wallpaper. But standing in the reflection, right where I should have been, was me. Only I wasn't moving. My reflection was smiling. I stumbled back, the lamp crashing to the floor and shattering. Darkness swallowed the room. In the brief flash before the bulb went out completely, I saw the reflection raise its hand and press it against the glass from the other side, and then it knocked. I didn't wait to see what came next. I grabbed my keys and bolted from that room, nearly slipping on the hallway carpet as I sprinted toward the stairs. The whole building seemed to groan as I ran, wood creaking, air shifting, doors rattling as I passed. When I reached the lobby, it was empty. The clerk was gone, the desk abandoned. The bell was missing from the counter. I shouted for someone, anyone, but my voice just echoed back. Outside, the night air hit me like a wave. The lot was empty, but the inn's neon sign still flickered, sputtering out sparks that hissed in the mist. I got in my car, turned the key, and didn't stop driving until the sun came up. By morning, I found myself in another small town about 30 miles east. I stopped at a diner for coffee, still shaking. When the waitress came over, I told her where I'd stayed, hoping maybe she'd laugh and tell me it was some local prank. Instead, her face went pale. "You said Miller's Inn?" she asked. "Yeah," I said. "Right off the old road. Place looked half dead, but there was a guy working the desk." She stared at me like I'd just said something insane. "Han, Miller's Inn burned down in 1993, she said. "Nobody's stayed there since. They never rebuilt." I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because I didn't know what else to do. I told her she was wrong, that I'd slept there, that the key was still in my pocket, but when I reached for it, it wasn't there. Later, after I'd calmed down, I tried to find the place again. The road twisted the same way I remembered, the trees crowding close, the fog rolling in thick. But when I reached the spot where the inn had been, all that was left was a foundation buried in weeds and blackened stone. The sign was still there, though, rusted, half-collapsed, and barely legible. But if you looked closely, you could still make out the faint red paint on the metal frame. Vacancy. I don't drive that way anymore, not since that night, but every now and then, when fog settles heavy on the road, I swear I see that same faint glow up ahead, a red light flickering just long enough to make you think there's a place to stop and rest. And sometimes, when I close my eyes, I can still hear it. That slow, patient tapping on the glass, like it's waiting for me to open the window. It's strange how some places never really leave you, no matter how many years have passed. For me, that place is Hollow Creek Elementary, or what's left of it. The school shut down before I even hit high school, closed after a flood tore through the valley in the late 80s. The river swelled past its banks and filled the entire lower floor. They said the water rose so fast, some of the kids in the basement classrooms didn't make it out in time. That story always stuck around town, whispered in half-truths and warnings, the kind parents used to scare you away from trespassing. But by the time I was 17, Hollow Creek wasn't a tragedy anymore. It was a dare. Every October, someone would bring it up. How people still heard the bell ringing at midnight, even though the bell itself had been taken down years ago. I never believed in ghost stories. Not really. But that October night, I went out there anyway, chasing the thrill like every dumb teenager before me. There were 4 of us. Me, Ryan, his girlfriend Becca, and my cousin Luke. We'd been drinking a bit, passing around a bottle of whiskey Ryan had swiped from his dad's garage. The air was cold enough to bite, and the mist coming off the river made everything look washed out and gray. We parked a mile up the old dirt road and walked the rest of the way, flashlights cutting through the dark like thin blades. The school sat at the bottom of a slope, surrounded by trees that had grown wild since the place shut down. The building was 2 stories of brick and rot, its windows boarded, roof sagging under decades of weather. The bell tower rose above it all, still standing, even though the bell itself was long gone. The metal crossbeam that once held it was rusted through, and ivy crawled up the tower like veins on an old arm. Ryan was the one who said we should go inside. He always had that kind of stupid confidence, the kind that gets people hurt. The front doors were warped but not locked. When he shoved them open, the hinges groaned like something in pain. The air that spilled out was thick with mold and mud. We stepped in, laughing too loudly to hide the nerves we all felt. Our flashlights danced across walls covered in graffiti and peeling paint. You could still make out faint murals beneath the damage. Smiling kids, animals, numbers, letters. The ghosts of a normal childhood, buried under grime. We made our way toward the gym first, just to look around. Most of the floorboards were warped or split from years of water damage. You could see where the flood line had stained the walls halfway up, a permanent reminder of how high the river came. I remember Luke saying something about how it didn't feel right, how it was too quiet. I laughed it off, told him the place was dead. What did he expect? But the truth was it was quiet in a way that felt unnatural. Not just the absence of sound, more like the air itself was holding still. No wind, no distant animals, nothing. Just the echo of our boots on wet wood and the drip of water somewhere deep below us. It was close to midnight when Ryan decided to climb up the stairs to the old bell tower. Becca stayed behind, saying the smell was making her sick. Luke and I followed him, though every step of those stairs felt wrong, soft underfoot, ready to give. The walls narrowed as we climbed, and the air grew colder. When we reached the top, the tower opened up into a small room with broken windows facing the woods. The rusted frame of the old bell mount hung empty, swaying slightly in the wind. Ryan grinned, said something like, "Guess no ghosts tonight," and took another drink. That's when it happened. The sound came out of nowhere, sharp, metallic, and distant. Dong. It was unmistakable. A bell. We froze, each of us looking at the others to see who'd make the first joke, but none of us said anything. Then it rang again. Dong, lower this time. Slower, like someone was pulling the rope by hand. Becca screamed from below. We rushed down the stairs, half-sliding, flashlights bouncing. When we reached the main hall, she was standing near the doorway, pointing toward the far end of the building where the basement stairs were. "I heard laughing," she said. A kid laughing. Ryan shone his light down the hall. The basement door was half open, and the concrete steps behind it were slick with mud. That was where the flood had filled up, where those kids had drowned. He told her it was probably raccoons or something, but I saw his hand shaking when he said it. Luke whispered that we should leave, that it wasn't worth it. But Ryan was already moving toward the basement. I don't know why I followed. Maybe it was pride, or maybe it was that same stupid thrill that had brought me there in the first place. The air grew colder as we went down. The smell of rot and stagnant water hit like a wall. When I reached the bottom, my boots sank into something wet. The beam of my flashlight caught on old furniture half submerged in mud. Desks, chairs, a toppled chalkboard. Then came the sound again. The bell. Only this time it wasn't distant. It was right above us, like the noise was echoing through the walls themselves. We all stopped moving. I turned slowly, scanning the room. That's when I heard it. Faint at first, then clearer. A giggle. It was soft, high-pitched, and close enough that the hair on my arms stood up. I swung my flashlight toward the sound, and that's when I saw them. Tiny handprints, smeared across the concrete walls. Dozens of them, some higher up, some low to the ground. The prints were fresh, glistening, darkened by moisture. When I reached out and touched one, the wall was warm. I jerked my hand back like I'd touched fire. The others were whispering behind me now, Ryan cursing under his breath, Becca sobbing quietly. Then, from the far end of the basement, a shape moved. It darted past the edge of my light, fast and small, like a child running. We bolted. There was no hesitation this time. We stumbled up the stairs, shoving each other to get through the door first. When I glanced back, I swear I saw something standing at the bottom of the steps. A faint outline in the dark, no more than 4 feet tall. Outside, the fog had thickened to a wall. We ran through it, gasping, until we reached the car. None of us spoke until we were halfway back up the road. The bell didn't ring again, but I kept waiting for it. Every bend in the road, every gust of wind, I thought I heard that single metallic note hiding underneath the sound of the tires. By the time we got back to town, Becca was hysterical. Luke didn't speak the whole drive. Ryan tried to laugh it off, said it was all just an echo from the old metal beams or the wind through the tower. I wanted to believe him, but later that night, lying in bed, I couldn't stop thinking about the warmth of that wall. The feeling of those tiny prints still damp under my fingers. 2 weeks later, Ryan wrapped his car around a guardrail. They said he'd been drinking, that he must have fallen asleep behind the wheel. The police found his phone in the passenger seat. The last thing he recorded was a video, a dark, shaky clip of him parked near the old school. In the background, you can hear the bell once, twice, and then faintly, a child laughing. I still drive that same road sometimes, though I take the long way around if I can help it. The school's mostly gone now. Nature swallowed what the flood didn't. Only the tower remains, a jagged silhouette against the tree line. Every October, when the air turns sharp and the river fog creeps low, I swear I can hear it. That single distant chime following my car, fading only when I cross the bridge out of town. People say ghosts are tied to the places they died. But I don't think that's true. Some places don't keep the dead. They become them. I hadn't been back to Grandma's farmhouse in nearly 15 years when my mother called and asked if I could help her clean it out. The house sat just outside Boone, tucked deep into the folds of the mountain where the fog never really lifted and cell service cut out halfway up the gravel road. Grandma had passed 3 weeks before, peacefully, the hospice nurse said, but there was nothing peaceful about being back there. The place felt preserved, like it had been waiting for us. The porch still creaked the same way it used to when I was a kid, that long, tired groan that warned the house someone was coming. Inside, everything smelled faintly of cedar, dust, and something older, like the stillness of a place that hadn't been aired out in decades. Mom moved slow, quiet. She kept saying it didn't feel right to touch anything, but the realtor had given us a deadline. So we started boxing things up, photo albums, doilies, old dishes wrapped in yellowing newspaper. Then we got to the parlor. It was the one room Grandma never let us play in. When we were kids, the door was always closed, and when we asked why, she'd just say, "That room ain't for noise." Now, the air inside was colder than the rest of the house. Dust floated in the light slanting through the curtains, and everything was exactly how she'd left it. Rocking chair by the window, crocheted blankets folded neatly on the armrest, and, at the far end of the room, the mirror. It stood taller than me, maybe 7 feet high, framed in dark cherry wood carved with tiny floral designs. A faded quilt hung over it, the same one I remembered from childhood, hand-stitched, patterned with blue stars. Mom stared at it for a long time before saying, "She always kept that covered." "Why?" I asked, her mouth tightened. Said it remembers what it sees. That sounded like one of those Appalachian sayings Grandma used to throw around, half superstition, half warning. Still, there was something about the way the light hit that quilt that made me uneasy, like whatever was underneath was waiting to be noticed. We worked around it at first. I packed up the books from the old shelves and Mom sorted through letters. But when she started dusting, her hand brushed the edge of the quilt and sent a small puff of dust into the air. She hesitated, then said, "We might as well take it down." "Can't haul it out like that." I told her I'd do it. When I pulled the quilt off, it felt heavier than it should have been, like it had absorbed years of still air and whispers. It fell to the floor in a cloud of dust, and the mirror stood bare for the first time in decades. For a second, I didn't recognize the reflection. The glass had a faint waviness to it, the kind you see in really old mirrors. But what it showed wasn't just us. Behind our reflections, standing by the doorway, was Grandma. She looked exactly like she did the day of her funeral. Gray dress, pearls, that tired little smile that never quite reached her eyes. I didn't move. Neither did Mom. The room went so quiet I could hear the clock ticking in the kitchen, slow and deliberate. "Do you see that?" I whispered. Mom's hand went to her mouth. Her voice came out shaking. "Put it back." Cover it, now. I bent down to grab the quilt, and when I looked up again, Grandma was closer in the reflection. Still smiling, still silent. But her eyes weren't on Mom, they were on me. The quilt slipped from my hands. I threw it over the mirror, covering the glass, and the instant it was hidden, the air shifted, like pressure lifting from a storm. Mom turned away and left the room without another word. I stayed there, staring at the shape of the covered mirror. The quiet felt alive. I could almost hear a hum underneath it, faint and low, like something waiting on the other side. We didn't talk about it that day. We just kept working until dark, each of us avoiding that room. When we finally left, Mom locked the parlor door and said we'd come back for the furniture later. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her, standing there smiling behind me. So I looked through the pictures I'd taken earlier, trying to distract myself. I was scrolling through them when I noticed it. In one of the photos, the mirror was still uncovered. You could see the reflection of the room, and in the far corner, near the rocking chair, was a figure. Not clear, not solid, but it was her, Grandma, peeking from the edge of the frame. The next morning, I drove back to the house. Mom hadn't arrived yet, and the key she'd given me was cold in my hand. The parlor door was still locked, but I could hear something faint through the wood. It sounded like movement, a soft rustling like fabric shifting. I opened the door. The mirror was uncovered again. The quilt lay folded neatly on the floor. The reflection looked normal this time. Empty room, dust motes, nothing else. But as I stepped closer, I realized my reflection wasn't matching me exactly. It was delayed by half a second. When I tilted my head, it followed a beat later. When I blinked, it didn't, and then just barely it smiled. Not a big grin. Just that same tired, polite smile Grandma used to give when company overstayed their welcome. I stumbled back and covered the mirror again, this time nailing the quilt edges into the frame so it couldn't slip. Then I left. Mom called that night to say she'd gone back to the house after me. She sounded strange, distracted. Said she couldn't find the mirror at all. I told her that wasn't possible. I'd just seen it that morning. She said, "No, you don't understand. The parlor's empty. There's just dust on the floor where it used to stand." She laughed a little, the kind of nervous laugh that doesn't mean humor. Guess it didn't want to be seen anymore. I didn't go back after that. The realtor handled the rest, and when the house sold, I made sure to keep the photos off my phone. But sometimes, late at night, I'll catch a reflection in a window or a dark TV screen, and for a split second, it's not mine. It's hers, standing a few feet behind me, still watching. When you grow up in a place like Ash Hollow, you learn early not to ask too many questions. The town sits deep between the ridges, the kind of place the sun forgets by mid-afternoon, and the fog never really burns off. Folks here have their own explanations for the strange things that happen. The way the dogs bark at nothing near the tree line, or how the wind sometimes carries voices down from the old mine road. But the one that always got me was the lights. Every autumn, right when the nights start turning cold, the sky over the hollow glows faintly green. It isn't bright, not like lightning or fire, just this steady low shimmer hanging over the valley like the color's been bled into the air itself. The old-timers call it swamp gas, even though there's no swamp for miles. Others say it's the spirits of the miners who died in the big cave-in back in '58, carrying their lanterns through the dark. I never believed any of it until that night. I was 16, just finished my first home game as a backup linebacker. We lost, of course, we always did, but I didn't care. I was just happy to be driving my dad's old Chevy pickup home under my own steam. It was late, maybe close to midnight. The highway was empty, the kind of quiet that only happens in the mountains when even the insects have given up for the night. The road back home cuts along the ridge before dipping into the hollow, and from up there, you can see the whole town spread out below, just a few lights blinking in the fog. That's when I saw it. At first, I thought it was lightning trapped inside a cloud, a faint pulse of green that rippled across the valley floor. But it didn't fade. It just hovered there slow and alive somehow. Then, as I drove further down the curve, I saw there were more of them, 3, maybe 4, moving low to the ground, almost like they were breathing. I slowed the truck, rolled down the window. No sound, not even the crickets. Then one of the lights detached from the others and drifted toward the road ahead. The glow was soft but steady, bright enough that it threw long shadows through the trees. I stopped the truck completely, engine idling. The light kept coming, swaying slightly until it was maybe 30 yards ahead of me. Then, without warning, everything shut off, the headlights, the dashboard, even the engine. The key was still turned, but the truck was dead silent. And so was the world. No wind. No insects. Nothing. I sat there gripping the steering wheel, staring through the windshield as that green light hovered over the asphalt. Then it dropped, straight down, like something had fallen out of it. When it touched the road, it blinked once and went out. I don't know why, but I got out. Maybe it was curiosity, or maybe I just wanted to prove it wasn't what I thought it was. The air felt strange, heavy. Every breath came slow, like it was pressing against my chest. The smell was metallic, like rust and wet rock. I walked toward where the light had been. That's when I saw him. He was standing right in the middle of the road, tall, shoulders hunched, clothes torn and caked with dirt. On his head was an old miner's helmet, the kind with the round glass lamp on front. Only it wasn't just the lamp that was glowing, it was the whole helmet. Faint and green, just like the lights. At first, I thought maybe it was someone messing with me. Some drifter or old-timer playing a trick. But as I stepped closer, I realized I could see through him. Not all the way, not like in the movies. Just enough that the outlines of the trees behind him shimmered faintly through his body. He turned his head slowly toward me. And that's when I noticed his face wasn't there. Not completely gone, just collapsed. The skin was sunken hollow, like it had been pressed in from the inside. The helmet's light flickered once, and I swear I saw what looked like bone beneath it. Then he lifted his hand. It wasn't a threatening gesture, just a slow, almost pleading motion, like he wanted me to stop. I froze, too scared to breathe, and then, just as suddenly as it had started, everything came back. The crickets, the wind, the engine behind me sputtering back to life. I blinked, and he was gone. Only the smell lingered, wet stone and something burnt like ozone after a storm. I drove home faster than I ever had in my life. I didn't tell anyone, not even my parents. I just parked the truck, locked my bedroom door, and sat there until sunrise. The next morning, I checked the road. No scorch marks, no footprints, nothing. But when I got back to town, old Mr. Parson, who ran the feed store, called me over. He said, "You were on that ridge last night, weren't you?" I didn't answer. He just nodded. "You saw him then." He told me his father had worked in the mines before the collapse. Said that the night it happened, the foreman had been lowering a crew down when one of the lanterns burst, catching the shaft timber on fire. The smoke trapped them all inside. They sealed the tunnels to stop the spread, buried them alive. Every year since, he said, around the anniversary of the cave-in, the lights return, lanterns searching for a way out. I wanted to laugh it off. But when I went home, I couldn't stop thinking about that miner's helmet. A few days later, I drove out to the old mine entrance. The county had fenced it off years ago, a big yellow sign warning about unstable ground. The opening was just a black hole cut into the side of the mountain. The air that came out was cold, carrying that same metallic tang I'd smelled that night. Someone had left a wooden cross beside the gate. On it was a name, Eli Turner, scratched in with a pocket knife. Beneath it, rusted into the dirt, was something small and round. It was a miner's lamp, the kind that fits into a helmet. Cracked but still faintly green, like the glow was trapped inside the glass. I didn't touch it. The next few weeks I tried to forget. Life went back to normal. I went to school, worked part-time at the gas station, hung out with friends. But I kept noticing things, little things. Static on the radio whenever I drove past the ridge. Lights flickering in the distance on nights with no moon. Once, while filling up a customer's truck, I caught my reflection in the window and swore I saw a miner's helmet sitting on my own head. That winter, a storm hit and washed out part of the mine road. The county sent a crew up to clear the debris, and one of the workers, someone I knew from school, didn't come back down. They said he must have slipped, maybe fell into one of the sealed tunnels. But the sheriff's report mentioned something strange. The last call from his radio came through with a single line, just before the signal cut out. "Tell them. The lights are moving again. Now I live 2 counties over. Haven't been back to Ash Hollow in years. But every fall, when the nights start turning sharp and the trees go bare, I'll catch it out my window, the faintest green shimmer on the horizon. It moves slow, like it's breathing. And sometimes when I stand in that glow just long enough, I can almost hear it, the low rumble of voices far underground. The sound of men still working the veins of a mine that's been buried for half a century, still searching for a way out. When I was a kid, our house sat at the very edge of the woods, the kind of place where the trees swallowed sound, and the nights came quicker than they should have. Just 100 yards downhill, behind the old tool shed and a rusted clothesline, ran Mill Creek, cutting through the valley like a dark vein. The water was ice cold year-round, even in the middle of July, when the rest of the county would be sweating under a heat wave. My father said it ran deep under the mountain before surfacing again behind our land. Spring-fed, he called it. But sometimes when I listened to it late at night, it didn't sound like water moving under rock. It sounded like something breathing. The strangest thing, though, wasn't the creek itself. It was the fog. Every evening, right around sunset, it would roll in without fail. A slow, pale mist that crawled up from the water's edge and spread through the trees, thick as smoke. It never drifted past the property line, never touched the house. It just stayed there, hovering over the creek like it was alive. My father never liked talking about it. The one time I asked, he just said, "That fog don't belong to us, son. It belongs to the man who never left." I didn't know what that meant, and he wouldn't explain. Whenever it came in, he'd shut the windows tight and draw the curtains, like it might come seeping through the cracks if we let it. I used to watch it from my bedroom window, the way it shimmered in the moonlight, moving slow, deliberate, almost like it was searching for something. I was 11 the night I stopped listening to my father. It was late summer, maybe early August. The air was heavy, the kind that sticks to your skin and smells like rain even when it isn't coming. I was sitting on the back porch with our dog, Copper, a red-bone coonhound who followed me everywhere, when the fog started creeping in from the creek. Copper stiffened first, nose twitching, ears perked. He gave a low growl, staring into the mist. "Leave it," I said, scratching his head, but he was already on his feet, whining. Then he barked, once, sharp and loud, and tore off down the hill. I remember the sound of his paws pounding through the brush, then fading as the fog swallowed him. I called for him. Once, twice, nothing. My father's warning echoed in my head, but Copper was all I had. I couldn't just let him disappear. So I grabbed the flashlight from the porch, took a deep breath, and started after him. The moment I stepped into that fog, the world changed. The air felt wrong, heavy and still, like being underwater. The beam from my flashlight barely cut 5 feet ahead before dissolving into white. Even my own footsteps sounded muffled, swallowed by the mist. I called out again, "Copper!" My voice came back to me warped, like it was traveling through something thick and distant. Then I heard it, barking, faint but clear, just downstream. I ran toward the sound, heart hammering, branches scraping at my arms. The closer I got to the creek, the colder it became, until it felt like I'd stepped into winter. My breath came out in clouds, even though it had been 80 degrees just minutes before. When I reached the water, I saw him. He was standing in the middle of the creek, knee-deep, facing downstream. At first I thought it was Copper, that maybe he'd chased something into the water. But then the beam of my flashlight caught the outline of a man. He was tall, too tall, with shoulders that seemed just a little too broad, like they'd been stretched. His clothes were soaked, clinging to him, but they looked wrong somehow. Old-fashioned, a canvas shirt, suspenders hanging loose, boots that looked more like they belonged in a coal mine than a creek. He wasn't moving, just standing there. I tried to speak, but my voice came out small. "Sir, you okay?" He turned his head slightly, not all the way, just enough that I could see part of his face through the fog. His skin was pale, gray even, and his mouth was open, frozen mid-scream. No sound came out. His eyes were empty, not blind, not missing, just hollow, like there was nothing behind them at all. For a second I couldn't move. Then behind me I heard Copper bark again, closer this time, frantic. I spun around trying to find him, but there was only fog. When I turned back, the man was gone. The creek was empty. I called for Copper until my throat hurt. No answer. When I stumbled back home, my father was already standing on the porch, shotgun in hand. He didn't yell. He didn't ask. He just looked at me with this expression I'd never seen before. Part anger, part fear, part something else. "Did you see him?" he asked quietly. I nodded. He sighed, set the gun down, and said, "Then he's taken something from you." I didn't sleep that night. I sat by the window waiting for Copper to come back, but he never did. The next morning, I went down to the creek again. The fog was gone, but the ground where I'd stood the night before was soaked through, and there were footprints in the mud, mine and someone else's, deeper, heavier. The strange part was, they didn't lead in or out of the water. They just stopped midstream, a few days later. My father finally told me what he knew. He said when he was a kid, the creek used to feed a small mill owned by a man named Caleb Ward. The man worked alone, milling lumber for most of the families in the valley. One spring there was a flood. The water rose fast, faster than anyone could react, and Caleb tried to shut the mill's gate before it washed away. He got trapped instead. When the water receded, they found the mill torn apart and his body tangled in the gears. They buried what was left up on the ridge, but my father swore the fog started coming the very next year, rolling down from the ridge, following the path of the creek. Some say the water wouldn't let him go, my father said. Others say he never really left. I wanted to believe it was just a story. But that didn't explain the footprints. It didn't explain the way the fog always stopped at our fence, or how the air around the creek stayed cold even when the rest of the valley baked in summer. As the years passed, I stayed away from that creek. Moved out after high school, went to work 3 counties over, but every time I came home to visit, I'd glance toward the woods at dusk, and the fog would always be there, waiting. When my father got sick, I came back for good. The house hadn't changed much, but the air felt heavier somehow, like the valley itself was holding its breath. The creek still ran cold, and the fog still rolled in every night. One evening, about a month after he passed, I heard something outside, low and distant, like a howl caught in the mist. For the first time in years, I walked down to the creek. The fog was thicker than ever, churning slow over the water's surface. And there he was, standing in the same place I'd seen him all those years ago. Same clothes, same hollow eyes, only this time I wasn't holding a flashlight. I could see his face clearly. The skin around his mouth was stretched thin, lips pulled back, like the muscles were frozen mid-scream. His chest rose and fell slowly, like he was still breathing, even though he shouldn't be. Then I heard something else, splashing behind him. At first, I thought it was the current, but then I saw it, something moving beneath the water, just under the surface. A shape, long and pale, weaving around his legs. The man didn't seem to notice. His mouth opened wider, and though no sound came out, I could swear I felt it, a vibration in the air, like the world around me was straining to hear him. I took a step back, and the fog thickened. It reached the edge of the bank, curling around my boots, and then I heard it, a bark, faint, far off, but I knew it instantly. Copper. I called his name once, twice. The sound bounced strangely, as if it were coming from underwater. I stepped closer into the fog, and for a moment I saw movement, a tail wagging, the shape of a dog standing just beyond the mist. I reached out. Something cold and wet brushed my fingers. Then the fog surged forward, swallowing everything. When I opened my eyes, I was standing alone in the creek. The fog was thinning, pulling back toward the trees. There was no man, no dog, just the sound of the water moving slow over the rocks. I stumbled home, soaked to the bone. The next morning I woke up with a thin layer of silt under my nails and a burning ache in my chest, like I'd swallowed river water in my sleep. That was 3 years ago. I don't go down there anymore, but some nights when the fog creeps close enough to touch the porch, I'll hear it again, a faint barking, echoing through the mist. And sometimes, if I listen long enough, I can hear another sound beneath it, the rasp of a breath that isn't mine, and a voice, soft and distant whispering from the creek, still here. When I took that job at the old post office, I wasn't expecting much more than boredom and the smell of paper. It was supposed to be temporary, a stopgap gig until I found something steadier. The place was built in 1904. A 2-story brick building sitting right in the middle of a half-dead mining town in southern West Virginia. Half the shops were shuttered, the old coal train tracks rusted to nothing, but the post office stayed open. It was like the town itself refused to admit it had died. My first week passed easy enough. Sorting mail, running the counter, taking lunch breaks outside under the overhang where the paint was peeling off in strips. There were only 3 of us working there. Clara, the postmaster, an older woman with hands like paper and a voice that never rose above a whisper, Dean, who handled the route deliveries, and me, the new guy. They were polite but quiet, like people who'd long since run out of things to say. It was on my second week that I first heard the noise. It was late, past closing, and I was locking up when I noticed it. A faint mechanical hum, like the old sorting machines you see in postal documentaries. Only we didn't have anything like that anymore. Just a few bins and a digital scanner that barely worked. The sound was coming from the floorboards beneath my feet. When I asked Clara about it the next morning, she didn't look up from her ledger. "Old wiring," she said. "This building's full of ghosts, electric and otherwise." Dean chuckled, but it wasn't a happy sound. "Just don't go poking around the basement," he added. "Bad floor down there. And the lights don't always stay on." I nodded, pretending to believe them, but that sound stayed in my head all day. I'd hear it sometimes when I was sorting, a low, rhythmic clatter, like gears turning and metal striking metal. I even asked if there used to be machinery down there. Clara said, "Once, long ago." Then she changed the subject. The basement door was at the back of the mailroom, a heavy steel door with a bolt lock that was never fastened. The paint was chipped away around the handle, and the keyhole looked older than anything else in the building. Every now and then, when the hallway was quiet, I'd swear I could feel air coming from behind it, cold and dry, like the inside of a cave. By the end of that week, I couldn't help myself. It was raining hard that night, and Dean had already gone home. Clara was in the front office finishing paperwork. I was sweeping the back when I heard the hum again, only louder this time. It had a rhythm, like something mechanical was still running down there. I set the broom aside and listened. It wasn't just machinery. There were voices, faint, overlapping whispers like people talking behind a wall. I thought maybe it was the pipes, or the sound of rain echoing through ducts, but I heard words. Short ones, fragments. "Still here? Waiting. Send it." I froze, staring at the basement door. When I opened it, the hinges groaned, and a draft of air rushed past me, cold enough to raise goosebumps along my arms. A narrow concrete stairway led down into the dark. A single bulb flickered at the bottom, throwing weak yellow light across the floor. The first thing I noticed was the smell: dust, old paper, and something sour underneath it, like mold or rust. There were stacks of mail everywhere. Bins, boxes, and bundles of letters tied with string, all piled haphazardly along the walls. Most were yellowed with age. I picked one up, brushing off the dust. The postmark read 1947, addressed to a name I didn't recognize. Mrs. Alma Trenton, Route 2. The ink had bled. But the return address was local. Every letter I checked was the same. Local names, dated anywhere from the 1930s to the 1960s. None of them had been opened. The hum grew louder as I moved deeper in. I followed it to the far end of the basement, where a set of rusted metal shelves leaned against the wall. Behind them, I found a small wooden table with an old letter sorting machine, half buried under dust. Its belt twitched once, jerking to life for just a second before stopping. That was when the light above me flickered. Once, twice, then steadied, and I realized the air had gone still. Completely silent, no hum, no dripping pipes, just quiet. Then I heard it, the sound of a chair creaking behind me. I turned, slowly. At first I thought I had imagined it. The basement looked the same. But as my eyes adjusted, I saw shapes in the far corner, faint outlines in the dim light. 3, maybe 4 figures, sitting at what looked like an old sorting table. Their heads were bent forward, motionless. "Hello?" I said, instantly regretting it. The figures didn't move. But the nearest one, a man, I think, shifted slightly, just enough for the light to catch his face. Only there wasn't one. The skin looked pale, stretched, like paper left too long in the sun. No eyes, no mouth, just folds of grayish flesh where features should have been. I stepped back. My boot hit a loose letter and the sound echoed like thunder. That was when the whispering started again. Dozens of voices now, all around me, rising and falling like wind through trees. I couldn't tell where they were coming from. The walls, the air, or the letters themselves. I looked down. The letters I'd scattered were moving, shuffling slightly across the floor like something was underneath them. Then a voice. clear, close, right next to my ear, whispered, "We're still waiting for our mail." The bulb above me popped, plunging the basement into darkness. I bolted. The stairs felt longer going up, like they'd stretched. My hand slipped on the railing as I ran, heart hammering in my throat. When I slammed the door shut behind me, I realized I wasn't breathing. Clara was standing there. She didn't look surprised, just tired. "You went down there, didn't you?" she said quietly. I nodded, too shaken to lie. She sighed. "Those letters, they don't belong to us anymore." I started to ask what she meant, but she turned away, walking toward the front without another word. The next morning, the basement door was bolted shut. A chain wrapped through the handle and padlocked tight. Clara told me the key was lost decades ago, but that wasn't true. I'd seen it, hanging from a hook beside her desk, labeled in neat handwriting, "Basement." For the rest of that month, I tried to ignore it, the faint humming that would start whenever the office got quiet. The way the air downstairs seemed to pulse behind the floorboards. But then one evening, right as we were closing up, Dean came running in from his truck. "Someone's in the basement," he said. His face was pale. We all heard at that time. The clatter of metal, the sound of something heavy sliding across the floor below. Clara grabbed the key without hesitation and handed it to me. "Go with him," she said to Dean. When we opened the door, cold air poured out like a breath. The bulb was on again, flickering. We crept down, flashlights cutting through the dust. The stacks of letters were gone. Every single one. The floor was bare except for a few torn envelopes scattered near the far wall. Dean kicked one over with his boot. The paper was damp, the ink smeared, but I could make out a few words, written in shaky, childlike handwriting, "Still waiting." That's when something moved behind us, a low shuffle, like someone dragging their feet. We spun around. Lights flashing across the walls, but there was nothing there. Only the old sorting table and a trail of fresh footprints leading away from it. Bare feet. Small, like a child's. Dean muttered something under his breath and started backing toward the stairs. But I couldn't move. My flashlight had caught something on the far wall. Hundreds of handprints. Small, dark smudges covering the brick from floor to ceiling, as if someone had pressed their palms there again and again over the years. Each one was marked in what looked like dust, or maybe soot. But when I reached out, the print beneath my fingertips was warm. We didn't talk on the way back up. Clara met us at the top and locked the door again. I told her what we saw, the prints, the letters, everything. She listened, then said, "This building used to handle telegrams before the war. Messages from soldiers that never made it home. Sometimes the senders waited. Sometimes they still do." She closed her ledger and looked at me with a kind of sad understanding. "Don't go down there again, and you'll be fine." I quit 2 weeks later. The night before I left, I stayed late to clean out my locker. When I was done, I took one last look at the back hallway. The light above the basement door was flickering again. Something made me walk closer. Maybe curiosity, maybe something else. On the door frame, carved faintly into the wood, I saw words I hadn't noticed before. Barely legible through the paint. Delivered, but never received. The next morning, I drove out of town before sunrise, but even now when the air turns cold and still, I sometimes catch that faint hum in the distance. The sound of old machinery, still sorting letters for people long gone, and once, not long ago, I got a letter in the mail, no return address. Postmark faded. Inside was a single slip of yellowed paper that smelled faintly of dust. It said, "We got your message. Still waiting for yours."